Welcome to Her Remarkable History. Remember, to support our channel, please subscribe. The disgusting abuse of Henry VIII's 6 wives. One of the most brutal and savage monarchs in English history was King Henry VIII. He even ordered the executions of 2 of his own wives, with them losing their heads, inside of the Tower of London. Many of his closest friends were executed, and many of his closest courtiers sought to try and get advancement into the king's eyes, and they would stab each other in the back to do this. Thomas Cromwell, for example, even suffered, a man considered the closest of friends with Henry VIII, and he would fall from grace and would lose his head also. But Henry VIII is most well known for the fact he had 6 wives, and these were women who were not treated very well. A number were shunned, verbally subjected to onslaughts of criticism and abuse, and Henry VIII was known for not being the best husband. He would regularly throughout his reign visit a number of his mistresses, of whom he had children with. His wives were meant to just accept this and put up with this terrible treatment. But what is the story of this disgusting abuse that Henry's wives suffered? Henry VIII's first wife and longest marriage was with Katherine of Aragon. She had previously been married to Henry's dead brother Arthur, who was deemed the heir to the throne, but Katherine was virtually held under house arrest by his father, Henry VII. He refused to pay back the large dowry payment which brought significant wealth into England, and because of this, Henry VII even considered marrying the young girl himself. But when Henry VIII married Katherine, initially the couple were rather happy, despite Henry regularly seeing mistresses. This must have been heartbreaking for Katherine, seeing her husband sneak off to bed with another woman from court, such as Mary Boleyn. But it was inside of her household that Katherine saw significant danger to her marriage. Henry VIII's hunting ground for mistresses and new fancies was inside of Katherine's ladies-in-waiting. She would later lose her husband to one of them. But Katherine suffered greatly throughout her marriage, with a significant amount of problems giving birth to children. The Queen had many miscarriages and stillbirths, as giving birth during the Tudor period was incredibly dangerous and risky for mother and child. This caused a significant degree of strain on her marriage, as Henry expected Katherine to produce him an heir, and in particular her son, who would inherit the throne and carry on the Tudor dynasty. It was this that eventually forced the king to annul his marriage with her, as the king went to huge steps to do this. His attention had been caught by a captivating young woman at court named Anne Boleyn, and she refused to take Henry VIII's bed until he had sorted out his marriage with Katherine. However, what happened next was incredibly insulting and savage to Katherine, his long-standing wife. The Pope would not grant Henry VIII his divorce, and because of this he turned his back on the Pope and split from the Catholic Church, declaring himself the supreme head of the Church of England. This plunged England into uncharted territory and religious turbulence, and Katherine was then forced out of the royal apartments, being made homeless, and she was then placed under house arrest. Katherine believed she was the king's only queen, but she then placed in many different castles and palaces, and was banned from seeing her daughter Mary. She was not allowed to see any of her friends, and was cruelly held under lock and key. She left her room only to attend mass, and at Kimbolton Castle she passed away after being shunned and held under house arrest for a number of years. The way her husband treated her was disgraceful, and he said he would allow her and Mary I to see each other if they acknowledged Anne Boleyn as the Queen. This was refused, and when she died on the 7th of January 1536, the king was told the following day, and distastefully, he and his wife Anne Boleyn celebrated greatly this news. But Anne Boleyn also had her fair share of ill and poor treatment at the hand of the king. Henry VIII, to begin with, was greatly frustrated when she refused to take to his bed, but no one could have predicted that the king's wrath and how his second wife would face this. In almost exactly the same manner as Katherine of Aragon's downfall came, Anne Boleyn, after marrying the king, suffered with miscarriages and problems with providing the king the son he wanted. She did give birth to a daughter named Elizabeth, who later went on to be Elizabeth I and the woman who became the greatest monarch of Tudor period. Henry's disappointment with having a son continued, and Anne suffered a severe miscarriage following the king's accident on the tilt-yard. Henry at the time had his attention turned to Jane Seymour, one of Anne Boleyn's ladies-in-waiting, and of course he then started seeing her, and he became to go to court with her. With this it was asked that Thomas Cromwell, his trusted friend, would search for a way out of his second marriage. This saw Anne Boleyn shockingly accused of adultery, incest and treason. These were all false charges made up by Cromwell, and they captivated the king, and he believed this. With this, 5 men were accused of sleeping with the Queen and plotting the death of Henry VIII. But Anne Boleyn was then brought to the Tower of London under arrest and was then placed on trial there. She was chastised by the judges, who had already found 5 men guilty, and these were then executed on Tower Hill. But Anne Boleyn was already deemed guilty and was sentenced to death. The abuse of Anne Boleyn entered mostly around her reputation, following this and the falsity she faced. She was led out to Tower Green, where a swordsman struck her head clean off, but it is believed she was practically murdered, with the charges against her being nothing but lies. With this, she can be seen as a victim of the king's will and power, and Anne Boleyn is seen as a tragic figure. But she forced the king's hand, and her need to marry the king came at the expense of Katherine of Aragon. Jane Seymour is seen as a tragic wife of the king. However, throughout her short time married to Henry VIII, she seemingly had a better experience than his other wives. She's sometimes regarded as the only one Henry truly loved, but this is based on the fact she gave him the one thing he truly wanted: an heir, a son. She gave birth to King Edward VI, but days after giving birth it was clear that she was very ill. She then, on the 24th of October 1537, died inside of Hampton Court Palace, in the very rooms that she gave birth to the heir. She did suffer a miscarriage, it's believed, before her successful birth. But what is shocking about Jane's death is that after she died, the king was looking rather quickly for a wife number 4. Jane Seymour is certainly one of the king's wives who escaped the king through death. Now, Anne of Cleves was the wife number 4 for Henry VIII, and her treatment when she arrived in England was terrible. Henry selected her over her sister Amalia, and with this she was brought from Germany to marry the English king. The marriage was arranged based solely really on an image painted by Hans Holbein. Anne of Cleves was painted well by Holbein, and Henry saw the image and thought she was stunning, and the negotiations were looked over by Thomas Cromwell. However, Anne did not know much about Henry VIII, and regarding her looks it was said that her hair was hanging down, which was fair, yellow and long. She was apparelled after the English fashion, with a French hood, which so set forth her beauty and good visage that every creature rejoiced to behold her. However, it was said that she was rather old-looking for her age, and when Henry VIII met her, things did not go well. It was said, the king so went up into the chamber where the said Lady Anne was looking out of a window to see the bull baiting which was going on in the courtyard, and suddenly he embraced and kissed her, and showed her a token which the king had sent for her New Year's gift, and she, being abashed and not knowing who it was, thanked him, and so he spoke with her, but she regarded him little, always looked out the window, and when the king saw that she took so little notice of his coming, he went into another chamber and took off his cloak, and came in again in a coat of purple velvet, and when the lords and knights saw his grace they did him reverence. But King Henry VIII then turned on her, and he called her the Mare of Flanders, and said she was not beautiful. He was highly critical of her looks, and he believed that he had been conned, almost like people get catfished now in the modern times. He tried to get Cromwell to sort the mess out and try to get him out of the marriage, but it was impossible to do this, and the king later turned on Cromwell. Anne of Cleves did do rather well out of the divorce proceedings, as she was given large amounts of money and estates, but she was slandered greatly. The king claimed that she was not a virgin, and he stated her looks, and with this Anne's reputation was damaged. But as mentioned, she probably did the best out of Henry's wives, living out the rest of her life in places such as Hever Castle, the former Boleyn family home. Catherine Howard was the young teenage girl who became Henry VIII's 5th wife, and it's believed she was between the age of 15 or 19 years old when she married the 49-year-old Henry VIII. By this time he was grotesque and large, but Catherine Howard was a girl who incurred the brutal wrath of Henry VIII and the scandal that gripped his royal court. Catherine was married with the king on the 28th of July 1540 at Oatlands Palace. However, shortly after marrying there was great accusation levelled against Catherine. She was a troubled girl, and it's believed her music teacher as a child assaulted her or had inappropriate relations with her. She was certainly groomed by him, and it was claimed that she was not a virgin when she married the king. However, she began to take a keen eye on one of the king's favourite courtiers, Thomas Culpeper. He was a man who, it was said, had succeeded in the queen's affections, and they wrote a love letter to each other. It's believed in the spring of 1541 that the pair were having secret liaisons, assumed to be relations, and these meetings were facilitated by Jane Boleyn, Lady Rochford, the widow of George Boleyn, the brother of Anne Boleyn. But many who learned of this bribed Catherine for favours themselves for their silence, and a number were appointed to her royal household if they kept their mouths shut. But Thomas Cranmer, the Archbishop of Canterbury, then tried to investigate, and he uncovered the stories that Catherine had relations with men before she married the king, including Francis Dereham, one of her secretaries. A love letter to Culpeper was found in her, and Dereham were executed. But whilst the king was praying in the chapel at Hampton Court on the 1st of November 1541, he was informed of his wife's, Catherine, infidelity, and things moved very quickly, and she was stripped of her title of Queen and was then sent to the Tower of London. Culpeper and Dereham were executed at Tyburn, and Catherine was then executed by axe on Tower Green. She was not granted the privilege of a sword to take her life, and was to die by the commoner's axe. Her head was taken off, and she was a woman who was considered abused by many men throughout her life. Her marriage to the king was a sick one, based on the king's lust, but it had brutal endings for Catherine. The king's final wife, Katherine Parr, number 6, could easily have gone the same way as Catherine Howard, with her losing her head. However, she managed to outlive the king, and many believed she was a nurse to Henry VIII, but this wasn't entirely true. Katherine Parr was very different, and her third husband was the king. She had been married before, and she was seen as a talented writer and scholar. She was a staunch Protestant, which was very dangerous at the time, and because of this, many treated her with suspicion. Catherine was sought by a number of the king's Catholic officials, who even drafted up a warrant for her arrest. Her religious views were seen as shady, as many believed that she was turning Henry VIII against Catholicism completely. Stephen Gardiner, the Bishop of Winchester, saw it as his ambition to destroy Katherine Parr, and he drew up an arrest warrant for her. It was believed that the king was attracted to her close friend Catherine Brandon, the Duchess of Suffolk, who would have been wife number 7. With this arrest warrant, many believed Catherine Parr could have faced execution and even burning at the stake for being a heretic. However, as the king was greatly very ill and down with his health issues, Catherine appealed to his softer side, and they resolved their differences regarding religion. However, it was close, as the king could have taken her head also, but the king died, and Catherine was granted a rather significant allowance each year, and was allowed to remain a queen dowager. But Henry VIII's 6 wives all had elements of their marriages with the king which were incredibly dangerous and horrifying. 2 of them lost their heads, many lost their reputations and suffered greatly at the hands of many members of the royal court. Today the king is considered the most brutal king that England has ever seen, and the way he treated his wives was nothing short of disgusting. Thank you for watching, and to support, please subscribe to Her Remarkable History. Thank you.